March 15th, 1944, 3:17 p.m. Bumpy Johnson walked into Banks' gun store with 3 associates and walked out with 200 firearms. 2 hours later, 400 bullets had been fired, and the NYPD had learned why you don't corner the most dangerous man in Harlem. This isn't just another heist story. This is the most audacious gun theft in New York history. A daylight robbery that turned into urban warfare and proved that sometimes the smartest criminals are the most dangerous ones. When the smoke cleared, Bumpy had more firepower than most police precincts, and he was about to use every single weapon. To understand why Bumpy Johnson robbed the most secure gun store in Manhattan, you need to understand what was happening in Harlem in March 1944. World War II had been raging for 3 years, and the war economy was changing everything about crime in New York. Military contracts meant government regulation of all firearms. Defense workers had steady paychecks, but weapons were becoming scarce on the black market. Gun stores were required to keep detailed records of every sale. Even the Italian families were having trouble arming their soldiers. For a criminal organization like Bumpy's, this created a serious problem. His men needed weapons to protect their territory, but government regulations made it nearly impossible to acquire firearms through normal channels. That's when Bumpy realized that the weapons shortage wasn't just a problem, it was an opportunity. If he could acquire a large number of firearms, he wouldn't just be solving his own organization's needs, he'd be creating a monopoly on the most valuable commodity in the criminal underworld. Banks' gun store on 42nd Street was the largest firearms dealer in Manhattan. They supplied weapons to police departments and security companies throughout the city. More importantly, they kept an inventory of over 500 weapons on the premises at any given time. The store was owned by Harold Banks, a 58-year-old former Marine who'd built his business catering to law enforcement and military contractors. Security included steel-reinforced doors, bulletproof glass windows, an alarm system connected directly to the local police precinct, and Banks himself, who carried a .45 automatic and had never been robbed in 15 years. But Bumpy Johnson had noticed something that everyone else missed. Banks' gun store's security was designed to prevent break-ins, not robberies. The steel doors and bulletproof glass were meant to keep criminals out at night. The alarm system was designed to summon police during after-hours intrusions. Nobody had planned for a daylight robbery by someone smart enough to turn the store's security against itself. Bumpy spent 3 weeks studying Banks' gun store. He observed daily routines, delivery schedules, and most importantly, police response times to alarms in that neighborhood. What he discovered was a vulnerability that could be exploited with perfect timing and overwhelming force. On March 13, 1944, Bumpy finalized his plan with 3 associates: Illinois Gordon, his most trusted lieutenant, Johnny Williams, an expert locksmith, and Raymond Quick Lewis, who could drive anything with wheels faster than anyone else in Harlem. "Here's how it works," Bumpy explained during their final planning meeting. "We go in at 3:15 p.m. on Wednesday. That's when Banks receives his weekly ammunition delivery, so the store will be fully stocked. It's also when he's in the back room doing inventory." Illinois Gordon studied the hand-drawn floor plan. "What about the alarm system?" "The alarm is connected to the 14th precinct," Bumpy replied. "Average response time is 8 minutes for a robbery call. We'll be gone in 6. And if Banks resists?" "Banks is a businessman, not a hero. He'll cooperate if we make it clear that cooperation is his best option for survival." Quick Lewis looked at the escape route. "You sure about this route through Times Square?" "Times Square is the one place police won't expect armed criminals to run. Too many witnesses, too much chaos. We blend into the crowd and disappear." Johnny Williams had one final concern. What if something goes wrong? What if response time is faster than 8 minutes? Bumpy smiled grimly. "Then we make sure they regret responding quickly." March 15, 1944, 3:17 p.m. The robbery began exactly as planned. Bumpy and his 3 associates entered Banks' gun store during the afternoon ammunition delivery. Harold Banks was in the back room, checking inventory against delivery invoices. The store was empty except for one customer examining hunting rifles. "Excuse me," Bumpy said to the customer politely, "but you need to leave. Now." The customer looked confused until he saw Illinois Gordon's .38 revolver. He dropped the rifle and hurried out without saying a word. Johnny Williams immediately went to work on the display cases, while Quick Lewis positioned himself at the front door as lookout. Within 30 seconds, they had established control of the store. That's when Harold Banks emerged from the back room. "What the hell?" Banks started to say, then stopped when he saw 4 armed men systematically emptying his gun cases. "Mr. Banks," Bumpy said calmly, removing weapons from a display case with practiced efficiency, "we're here to make a withdrawal from your inventory. You can cooperate, or you can make this more difficult than it needs to be." Banks was a Marine veteran who'd seen combat in the Pacific. He wasn't easily intimidated. His hand moved toward the E-45 automatic on his hip. "I wouldn't," Illinois Gordon said, training his revolver on Banks. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We're here for the guns. Give us the guns, and everyone goes home safely." "You're making a mistake," Banks said. "This store is connected directly to the police. They'll be here in minutes." "We're counting on it," Bumpy replied. "In fact, we're hoping they bring their best men." For the next 5 minutes, Bumpy's team worked with military precision. Johnny Williams opened every gun case in the store. Illinois Gordon collected weapons and ammunition, organizing them for quick transport. Quick Lewis monitored the street for police activity. By 3:23 p.m., they had collected 127 pistols, 43 rifles, 28 shotguns, and over 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The weapons filled 4 large duffel bags they'd brought specifically for this purpose. That's when Quick Lewis called out, "Company's coming! 3 patrol cars, 2 blocks away." "Right on schedule," Bumpy said. "Everyone ready?" Harold Banks watched in amazement as the 4 men prepared for police arrival with the same calm efficiency they'd shown during the robbery. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. At 3:25 p.m., 8 minutes after the robbery began, 3 NYPD patrol cars surrounded Banks' gun store. 6 officers took positions behind their vehicles and called for the criminals to surrender. Instead of surrendering, Bumpy Johnson's team opened fire. But they weren't shooting to kill police officers. They were shooting to disable police vehicles and force the officers into defensive positions. Bullets shattered windshields, punctured tires, and destroyed radio equipment. Within 30 seconds, the 3 patrol cars were inoperable, and 6 police officers were pinned down behind inadequate cover. "This is Officer McCarthy," one of the policemen shouted into his damaged radio. "We need backup at Banks' gun store. Armed robbery in progress with heavy resistance." The message got through, but the response created exactly the situation Bumpy had planned for. Instead of a quick arrest, the NYPD now faced an armed standoff with criminals who had access to 200 weapons and unlimited ammunition. At 3:30 p.m., additional police units arrived. But instead of overwhelming the criminals, they found themselves facing a tactical nightmare. Bumpy's team had barricaded themselves inside the gun store, using the same security features that protected the building as defensive positions. The steel-reinforced doors couldn't be breached quickly. The bulletproof windows prevented police snipers from getting clear shots, and the narrow street layout made it impossible to surround the building effectively. Sergeant Morrison, Officer McCarthy reported to the ranking officer, "We've got 4 suspects barricaded inside with access to the store's entire inventory. They're using hunting rifles for long-range fire and shotguns to control the approaches." Sergeant Morrison had been a police officer for 20 years, but he'd never faced anything like this. "How many weapons are we talking about?" According to the owner, over 500 firearms, and they've got all the ammunition in the store. It was every police officer's nightmare. Criminals with superior firepower in a defensible position. At 3:45 p.m., 1 hour into the standoff, the situation escalated when Bumpy's team began using hunting rifles to engage police officers from longer ranges. "They've got us outgunned and outpositioned," Officer Rodriguez reported from behind a patrol car that had been reduced to scrap metal by rifle fire. "We can't advance, and we can't retreat without taking casualties." Sergeant Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of the confrontation. Instead of trying to storm the gun store, he would lay siege to it and wait for federal assistance. But Bumpy Johnson had anticipated this response too. At 4 a.m., while police officers maintained their defensive positions, smoke began pouring from the back of Bank's gun store. "Building's on fire!" Officer Chen called out. "The suspects are burning evidence!" But the smoke wasn't coming from burning evidence. It was coming from smoke grenades that Johnny Williams had improvised from hunting supplies. The thick black smoke provided cover for the next phase of Bumpy's plan. At 4:15 p.m., 90 minutes into the standoff, the front door opened. Harold Banks emerged with his hands raised, followed by Bumpy Johnson. "Don't shoot," Banks called out. "They're surrendering." But as police officers rose from their defensive positions, they realized they'd been outmaneuvered one final time. The 4 men who emerged from the gun store weren't carrying the 200 weapons they'd stolen. Those weapons, along with the ammunition, had been passed through a back window to associates who'd been waiting in a delivery truck since the beginning of the robbery. "Officers," Bumpy announced as police moved to arrest him, "you'll find that Mr. Banks's inventory is missing approximately 200 firearms and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. They were removed from the premises during the past 90 minutes. Sergeant Morrison's face went pale. "Where are the weapons?" "Distributed throughout Harlem to people who will put them to good use defending their community." The NYPD had spent 2 hours fighting an armed standoff, only to discover that the weapons had been stolen anyway. Bumpy Johnson had used the police response as a distraction, keeping officers occupied while his associates completed the largest gun theft in New York history. The aftermath of the Bank's gun store robbery sent shockwaves through law enforcement and the criminal underworld. The NYPD had deployed 30 officers, fired over 400 rounds of ammunition, and sustained multiple vehicle losses. But they'd recovered none of the stolen weapons and had been tactically outmaneuvered by 4 criminals using principles of military strategy. Federal investigators would later describe the robbery as the most sophisticated firearms theft in American criminal history. Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated planning, execution, and tactical thinking that impressed even law enforcement professionals. But the real impact wasn't tactical, it was economic. With 200 firearms and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, Bumpy had created a weapons monopoly in Harlem that would last for years. Every criminal organization in New York now had to negotiate with him for access to firearms. The weapons from the Bank's gun store robbery were never recovered. FBI agents spent months investigating, but the firearms had been distributed so quickly throughout Harlem that tracking them became impossible. Bumpy Johnson served 18 months in federal prison for the robbery. When he was released, he found that the weapons theft had elevated his status throughout the criminal underworld. He'd proven that intelligence and planning could overcome any security system. The Bank's gun store robbery became a case study in criminal strategy that law enforcement agencies studied for decades. It proved that the most dangerous criminals weren't the most violent ones, they were the most intelligent ones. Harold Banks, whose store had been robbed, would later say that he'd never seen criminals operate with such professionalism. "They treated it like a military operation," he told investigators. "Everything was planned, everything was executed perfectly, and they never lost control of the situation." This is the story of how one man robbed the most secure gun store in Manhattan and used the police response to complete the perfect heist. 2 hours of urban warfare that ended with 200 weapons in the hands of the smartest criminal in New York. If this story of strategic planning, tactical brilliance, and the most audacious gun heist in history captivated you, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who appreciates that the best plans turn obstacles into opportunities. And in the comments, let me know, was this criminal genius or just lucky timing? Next week, we're revealing what happened to those 200 stolen weapons and how they changed the balance of power in New York's underworld forever. You won't want to miss that.